The city was alive that night, cars rushing by, people laughing in restaurants, lights glowing from tall buildings. But in one small apartment on the corner of Willow Street, everything was quiet. Sarah Miller sat by the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. The sound of rain was the only thing keeping her company. She held a cup of cold tea in her hands, untouched. The television was on, but she wasn't really watching it. It had been 8 months since Sarah moved to New York. She came here with big dreams to start a new life, to find a better job, maybe even a new version of herself. But the city had not been kind to her. Every morning, she left for work in a rush. Every evening, she came home to silence. No one said good morning. No one asked how her day was. No friends, no family, no one waiting for her. Her phone buzzed sometimes, but it was never what she hoped for, just emails, promotions, or reminders from apps she never used. She sighed, staring at her reflection in the dark window. Maybe people just aren't meant to be close anymore, she whispered to herself. The truth was, Sarah hadn't always been this quiet. A few years ago, she used to laugh easily. She loved going out, meeting new people, helping strangers. But one heartbreak changed everything. Her fiancé had left her suddenly, with no explanation, right before their wedding. After that, she stopped trusting people. Moving to New York was supposed to be her fresh start. But instead, it became a lonely maze she couldn't escape. That night, the rain grew heavier. Sarah decided to go out and buy a few things from the store, mostly to get out of the silence. She grabbed her coat, keys, and umbrella. The streets were wet and shining under the streetlights. People hurried past with umbrellas, their faces hidden. Sarah walked quietly, her shoes splashing in the puddles. Inside the small grocery store, she picked up some milk, bread, and soup cans. She avoided eye contact with anyone, keeping her head down. At the checkout counter, the cashier smiled politely. "Evening," he said. Sarah nodded slightly, paid, and walked out. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. She adjusted her bag and started walking home. Her apartment was just 2 blocks away. But halfway down the street, her grocery bag suddenly tore open. Everything spilled onto the wet sidewalk, milk rolling one way, bread soaking in the puddle. "Oh no," she muttered, kneeling down to pick things up. Her hands trembled a little, she felt embarrassed. People passed by without stopping. Then, she heard a voice, warm and calm. "Hey, are you okay?" Sarah looked up. A man stood there, holding an umbrella over both of them. He looked around 30, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. His jacket was wet, his hair damp from the rain. "I'm fine," Sarah said quickly, trying to gather her things. He crouched down beside her anyway. "Looks like your bag didn't survive the weather," he joked softly, picking up a can of soup. Sarah gave a small, awkward smile. "Yeah, guess not." "Here," he said, pulling a paper bag from his backpack. "You can use this." "Thank you," she said quietly, taking it. "No problem. I'm Ethan, by the way. Ethan Parker." She hesitated, then replied, "Sarah." "Sarah Miller. Nice to meet you, Sarah. You live around here?" She nodded. "Just down the street." He smiled. "Me too. I own that little coffee shop at the corner, Bean Haven. Ever seen it?" Sarah thought for a moment. "I've walked past it a few times." "Well, next time, stop by. The coffee's on me." She looked unsure. "That's kind of you, but..." He interrupted softly, "No but. You look like you could use a warm drink and a friendly face." His words caught her off guard. No one had spoken to her like that in months, with genuine kindness. The rain started to pick up again. Ethan held the umbrella closer over her. Come on, let's get you home before it gets worse. They walked together under the umbrella, talking a little. Ethan told her how he opened his cafe 2 years ago, how he loved meeting people, hearing their stories. Sarah mostly listened, but something about his voice made her feel calm. When they reached her building, she turned to him. "Thank you for helping me," she said. He smiled. "Anytime. And hey, remember coffee's waiting for you tomorrow. I make a mean caramel latte." She laughed softly. "We'll see. Good night, Sarah." "Good night, Ethan." As he walked away, Sarah stood at the doorway, watching him disappear into the rain. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely invisible. She walked inside, set the bag down, and leaned against the wall. Her heart felt different. Not fixed, but lighter somehow. She whispered to herself, maybe not everyone walks away. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside, something small and bright began to grow again. The next morning, sunlight broke through the thin curtains of Sarah's apartment. She woke up later than usual, her mind still replaying last night's rain and that stranger's kind smile. "Ethan Parker," she whispered softly. The name somehow felt warm. She tried to shake it off, convincing herself it was just a random act of kindness. People helped others all the time, right? But deep down, Sarah knew no one had looked at her like that in months. Not with pity, but with genuine care. After a few hours of working on her laptop, she decided to take a short walk. The city was quieter than usual that morning. As she passed the corner of Maple and Willow, she noticed the small cafe Ethan had mentioned, Bean Haven. It was cozy, with soft yellow lights glowing through the windows. The sign outside read, "Warm coffee, warmer hearts." Sarah stood there for a moment, debating whether to go in. Her heart said yes. Her fear said no. But finally, curiosity won. As she pushed open the door, a small bell chimed. The smell of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon filled the air. It felt like stepping into another world. Soft music, laughter, and the sound of steaming milk. Ethan was behind the counter, wearing a brown apron and his usual easy smile. When he saw her, his eyes lit up. Well, look who decided to show up," he said playfully. Sarah smiled shyly. "I was just passing by." "Sure you were," he laughed. "What can I get you? Caramel latte, right? Or do you want to be adventurous today?" She laughed lightly, a sound that felt strange after so long. "Caramel latte's fine." "Coming right up," he said, getting to work. As she sat by the window, Sarah watched the people outside. For once, she didn't feel like a stranger among them. When Ethan brought her coffee, he placed a small cookie on the saucer. "On the house," he said. Sarah smiled. "You don't have to keep giving me free stuff, you know." "I don't have to," he replied, "but I want to. Everyone deserves a little kindness now and then." She looked down, her eyes soft. "You really believe that?" "Of course," Ethan said. "Kindness is like coffee, it wakes people up." They both laughed. That morning turned into a 2-hour conversation. Sarah learned that Ethan had grown up in Chicago. He moved to New York to chase his dream of opening a cafe that felt like home, not just for him, but for anyone who walked through the door. "People come here tired, lonely, or just lost," he said, looking around. "If I can make them smile for even a minute, that's enough." Sarah listened quietly. She hadn't told him much about herself yet. She wasn't ready. When she finally left, Ethan waved. "See you tomorrow, maybe." She hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe." The next day, Sarah came back. Then the next. And the next after that. Soon, Bean Haven became part of her daily routine. Each morning, Ethan would have her drink ready before she even ordered it. They would talk about little things: the weather, movies, music. Ethan never asked personal questions. He never pushed her to open up. He just made her laugh. And for Sarah, that was enough. Sometimes, she stayed longer after finishing her coffee, watching how Ethan treated everyone: the elderly man who always forgot his wallet, the teenage girl studying for exams, the tired nurse coming off a night shift. He treated each person like they mattered. It reminded Sarah of a version of herself she had forgotten: the one who used to care, to help, to smile without reason. One evening, just as the cafe was closing, Sarah noticed Ethan cleaning tables. She hesitated, then offered, "Need some help?" He looked surprised, then smiled. "Sure, I'd love that." They cleaned together, laughing over spilled coffee and stubborn stains. Sarah felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. When they finished, Ethan handed her a cup of hot chocolate. "Payment for your hard work," he said. Sarah chuckled. "You're terrible at business." "Maybe," Ethan replied, "but I'm great at friendship." That word friendship hit something deep inside her. It had been so long since anyone had called her a friend. They sat together, sipping their drinks. The cafe was quiet now, just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft glow of the lights. Ethan looked at her and said gently, "You know, you have this look sometimes. Like you're somewhere else. Somewhere sad." Sarah froze for a second, unsure how to answer. "I guess I just think too much." He nodded, not pressing further. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No judgment. No fixing. Just listening." Something in his tone felt real, like a promise. Sarah smiled faintly. "Thanks, Ethan. Maybe someday." He raised his cup slightly. "To someday, then." She laughed softly, clinking her cup against his. To someday. That night, as Sarah walked home, the city lights seemed a little brighter. The air felt lighter. She didn't know what this connection was or where it would lead. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Because tomorrow meant coffee. And laughter. And maybe, hope. Days turned into weeks, and Bean Haven slowly became Sarah's favorite place in the city. Every morning, she pushed open the cafe door to the familiar sound of the little bell and the comforting smell of coffee beans and cinnamon. It felt like walking into a warm hug, safe, calm, alive. Ethan would always greet her with a grin. "Morning, Sarah. Your usual caramel latte." She would nod with a small smile. "You already know." Sometimes, she stayed for just a coffee. Other times, she helped around the cafe, arranging flowers on tables, refilling sugar jars, or wiping the counter when Ethan got busy. At first, she only helped for a few minutes, but soon, she started spending hours there. The cafe became her second home, a place where she felt seen. One afternoon, Ethan found her sitting by the window, writing in a small notebook. "What's that?" he asked. She smiled shyly. "Just notes. Thoughts. I used to write a lot, but I stopped." "Why?" he asked gently. "Because no one ever read them," she said softly. Ethan sat beside her. "Then maybe you weren't writing for them. Maybe you were writing for you." Sarah looked at him for a moment. That one sentence stayed with her all day. Over time, their conversations grew deeper. Sarah started sharing small pieces of her past: how she once wanted to be a teacher, how she loved painting sunsets, and how she lost herself after her fiancé left. Ethan listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. Sometimes, he would just nod and hand her another cup of coffee, as if saying, "You don't have to hide here." There was one evening when the cafe was nearly empty. Outside, the sky was orange with the setting sun. Sarah was helping Ethan close up. As she was cleaning a table, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and froze. A message flashed on the screen. Hope you're doing well. I'm getting married next month. Thought you should know. It was from him, her ex-fiancé. Her hands trembled as she read the words again. She felt her chest tighten, old pain rushing back like a wave she thought she had escaped. Without realizing it, tears started to fall. She quickly wiped them away, but Ethan had already noticed. "Sarah," he said softly, walking toward her. "What happened?" She shook her head, trying to smile. "It's nothing. I'm just being stupid." He didn't press her. He didn't say don't cry or you'll be fine. Instead, he quietly sat next to her, handing her a napkin. They sat there in silence for a long moment, no words, just the sound of the espresso machine cooling down and the faint hum of music from the speakers. Finally, Sarah whispered, "It's strange how one message can break you all over again." Ethan looked at her gently. "Sometimes it's not the message. It's the memory that comes with it." She nodded, tears still in her eyes. "I thought I was past it. But it still hurts." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to rush healing. It's not a race." That night, Ethan walked her home again, just like the first time they met. The street lights cast soft shadows on the wet pavement. Sarah felt tired but peaceful, like she didn't have to pretend anymore. Before they reached her door, Ethan stopped. "You know, I think pain doesn't disappear," he said. "It just changes shape." Sarah looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "Well," he said, "when you care for someone, that love doesn't vanish. It just becomes part of who you are, part of how you see the world. And maybe, someday, it helps you love better." She smiled through her tears. "That's actually beautiful." Ethan grinned. "Told you I make more than good coffee." She laughed softly, the sound breaking through the heaviness in her chest. In the days that followed, Sarah began to change. She smiled more. She started painting again. She even shared her writing with Ethan, small stories about people finding hope in unlikely places. Ethan printed one of her short lines and hung it on the cafe wall behind the counter. It said, "Sometimes a small act of kindness can save someone's day or their life." When Sarah saw it, she couldn't hold back her tears. "You really hung it up?" Ethan nodded. "I told you. Your words deserve to be read." That tiny gesture meant everything to her. For the first time in years, she felt like her voice mattered again. But healing isn't always a straight line. One morning, Sarah didn't show up. Ethan thought maybe she was busy. The next day, she still didn't come. On the third day, he began to worry. When she finally walked in on the fourth morning, her face looked pale. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Sarah forced a smile. "Just bad dreams. I'm fine." But she wasn't. Deep inside, the memories still haunted her. Ethan could see it, the tired eyes, the forced smile. Yet, he didn't push. He just made her coffee and said, "You don't have to be okay all the time. Just be here." Sarah looked at him for a long moment and whispered, "Thank you, for not giving up on me." Ethan smiled softly. "Hey, we all need someone who doesn't walk away." As the camera of life slowly zoomed out, Sarah sitting by the cafe window, sunlight touching her face, Ethan cleaning tables in the background, it felt clear that something inside her was quietly healing. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. The wind outside was colder than usual that morning. Leaves danced across the empty street as Ethan opened the doors of Bean Haven. He looked toward the window seat, Sarah's seat, and smiled to himself. But that smile faded as the hours passed. The doorbell didn't ring. Her laughter didn't fill the room. He told himself maybe she was just busy. She had mentioned starting a few freelance writing jobs. But when the next day came and her chair was still empty, a quiet worry started to grow in his chest. By the third day, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling. Sarah never just disappeared like that. That evening, after closing the cafe, he walked to her apartment building. The rain had started again, soft, cold drops that seemed to whisper something was wrong. He climbed the narrow stairs and stopped in front of her door. He knocked gently. "Sarah?" "It's Ethan." No answer. He waited, knocked again. "Hey, I just wanted to check on you. Are you okay?" Still nothing. Only the faint hum of the hallway lights. He sighed, pulling out a small piece of paper from his pocket. He hesitated for a moment, then began to write. "You are not alone, Sarah. The world still needs your smile. Come back when you're ready, I'll be waiting at the cafe." He folded the note and slipped it under her door before walking away, his footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. The next morning, Ethan opened the cafe as usual. The bell chimed, customers came and went, laughter filled the air, but for him, something was missing. Every time the door opened, his heart hoped it would be her. Every time it wasn't, that hope dimmed a little more. He tried to focus on work, serving coffee, greeting regulars, but his eyes kept wandering to the door. By late afternoon, he began to accept that maybe Sarah needed space. He told himself not to push, not to worry too much. But deep down, he couldn't ignore the ache of missing someone who had quietly become part of his everyday. That evening, as the cafe lights flickered in the golden glow of sunset, the door opened. Ethan looked up. There she was. Sarah stood in the doorway, holding the note he had left. Her eyes were red from crying, her hair slightly messy, but there was something different in her face, something raw and honest. Ethan froze for a second, relief flooding through him. "Hey," he said softly. "You came back." She walked slowly toward him, holding out the note. "You wrote this?" He nodded. "Yeah. I didn't know what else to do." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "No one has ever waited for me before." Ethan smiled gently. "Well, I did." Her voice broke. I just needed time." The memories came back again. It felt like everything was slipping away. "I didn't want to bring my sadness here." He shook his head softly. "Sarah, you don't have to hide your sadness. This place we're not just here for your smiles. We're here for all of you." That sentence broke something inside her in a good way. Without thinking, she stepped forward and hugged him. For a moment, she just stood there, crying quietly against his shoulder. Ethan didn't say anything. He just held her, letting her breathe again. After a while, Sarah pulled away, wiping her tears. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Don't be," Ethan replied. "You don't have to apologize for feeling." He guided her to her usual seat by the window. "Sit. I'll make your favorite." Minutes later, he returned with a caramel latte, the same drink from their very first meeting. He placed it in front of her, smiling. Sarah looked at the cup and then at him. "You remembered?" Ethan chuckled. "Of course I did. You're hard to forget." For the first time in days, Sarah laughed a real laugh. It echoed softly in the cafe, filling the space that had felt so empty. They talked for hours that evening. Sarah told him about her sleepless nights, her fear of being abandoned, and how the message from her ex had reopened old wounds. Ethan listened, his eyes calm and kind. "You know," he said quietly, "pain doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you cared deeply. And that's something beautiful." Sarah smiled through her tears. "You really think so?" "I do," he said. "And I think you're stronger than you realize." As the cafe emptied and the city lights glowed outside, Sarah looked around. The place that had once been just another coffee shop now felt like home. She took a deep breath and said, "Thank you, Ethan. For waiting. For not walking away. He smiled. You'd do the same for me. She nodded slowly. Yeah. I think I would. The rain outside had stopped. The streets shimmered under the soft glow of streetlights. When Sarah finally stood to leave, she turned back and said, I'll see you tomorrow. Ethan grinned. You better. As she walked out the door, the camera of life seemed to follow her, the rain-slicked streets reflecting light, her footsteps echoing softly. For the first time, Sarah didn't walk home feeling lonely. She felt seen. She felt cared for. She felt loved, even if she didn't call it that yet. And Ethan, standing behind the counter, watched her disappear into the night, a quiet smile on his face. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: sometimes, waiting for someone is the purest form of love there is. The seasons changed. Winter slowly faded, and spring painted the city in soft colors: pink blossoms on trees, sunlight pouring through cafe windows, laughter echoing in the streets again. Inside Bean Haven, everything looked brighter. The little cafe that once felt quiet now buzzed with life. New customers came every day, drawn by the cozy atmosphere and the smell of fresh coffee. And at the heart of it all was Sarah. She wasn't just a customer anymore. Ethan had officially made her part of the cafe team. She helped with decorations, wrote small inspirational quotes on napkins, and greeted customers with a gentle smile. The regulars loved her. People noticed how kind she was, how her presence made the cafe feel safe. Every morning, Ethan would watch her from behind the counter, smiling to himself. She laughed more now, freely, without hesitation. There was a light in her that hadn't been there before. Sometimes, when she looked back and caught him staring, she'd tease him. What? She'd say, laughing. He'd shrug. Nothing. Just making sure you're real. One quiet afternoon, the cafe was nearly empty. The sunlight fell softly on the wooden floor. Sarah sat near the window, sketching in her notebook. Ethan walked over, holding 2 cups of coffee. Thought you could use a refill, he said. Thanks, she smiled. I was just writing a few ideas for next week's quote board. He leaned over to peek. What's today's? She read aloud, softly, sometimes one small act of kindness can change a life forever. Ethan's eyes softened. That sounds familiar. She smiled. Yeah, someone taught me that. They both laughed quietly, but there was something deeper in their eyes, the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. That evening, after closing time, they sat together outside the cafe, watching the city lights flicker to life. Sarah sipped her drink and said, You know, when I first met you, I didn't think I'd ever feel normal again. I was lost. Ethan looked at her, his voice calm. We all get lost sometimes. But you found your way back. She smiled faintly. No. You helped me find it? He shook his head gently. No, Sarah. I just reminded you who you already were. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the city: distant laughter, cars passing, soft wind rustling through the trees. Then Sarah said something that made Ethan's heart stop for a moment. You know what's funny? I used to think love was this big, dramatic thing: fireworks, promises, forever. But now I think love is just kindness that stays. Ethan smiled. Yeah, he said softly. I think you're right. A few months later, Bean Haven celebrated its 3rd anniversary. The cafe was packed with people, laughter, music, and the smell of freshly baked cookies filled the air. Photos hung all around the walls: pictures of regular customers, small memories, smiles frozen in time. In the center of the wall was one photo that stood out: Sarah and Ethan behind the counter, laughing while covered in flour from a baking mishap. Below it, a small handwritten note read, From strangers to family, this is what kindness can create. Customers pointed at the photo, smiling. Some even asked about their story. Ethan would just grin and say, "It's a long one." But it started with spilled groceries and a rainy night. Sarah would laugh every time she heard that. Later that evening, after everyone left, Sarah and Ethan sat alone in the quiet cafe. A soft song played from the old radio. Sarah looked around, her eyes glistening. "This place saved me," she said quietly. "You saved me." Ethan shook his head with a smile. "No, Sarah. You saved yourself. You just needed someone to remind you that you still mattered." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they weren't from sadness. They were from gratitude, the kind that fills your chest until it feels too full. She whispered, "Thank you, for seeing me when I was invisible." He smiled, his voice soft. "Thank you for letting me." They sat there for a long time, not saying much, just existing, two people who had found light in each other's darkness. Outside, the city lights shimmered. Inside, the cafe glowed warm and golden, a small symbol of everything they had rebuilt. As the camera of life zoomed out, the streets alive with laughter, the cafe shining softly in the night, Sarah's voice could be heard narrating softly, as if speaking from her heart. "I thought my story was over when loneliness became my only friend. But then, one kind stranger stopped to help me on a rainy night, and everything changed. He didn't rescue me. He reminded me that love still exists in small moments, in warm smiles, in people who choose to stay." From lonely, to loved. The screen would fade to black, leaving only the soft sound of a coffee cup being placed on a wooden table, and maybe, just maybe, a reminder to everyone watching. Sometimes, one simple act of kindness can rewrite an entire life.